In 1917, Max Weber gave the speech Science as a Vocation at the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität in Munich as part of a lecture series about science as a vocation and as a calling. In this lecture, Weber raises the question of disenchantment,
or Entzauberung. With this term, which Weber draws from broader German intellectual debates of his time, he describes Western society as increasingly modernized, bureaucratic, and secularized.
Disenchantment, according to Weber, is a defining condition of modern life.
Through this process, the world becomes more and more explained, controlled, and organized through rational calculation. The world is no longer experienced as governed by mysterious or inscrutable forces.
Modern individuals come to believe that everything can in fact be rationally explained, almost calculated, and that nothing is ultimately beyond rational explanation.
Disenchantment is therefore deeply entangled with rationalization and intellectualization. Religious worldviews lose their authoritative role in explaining reality and are increasingly replaced by scientific thinking. However, science tells us how things work, but it cannot tell us how to live. Questions of meaning, value, and purpose are pushed outside the domain of scientific authority. And because religion no longer occupies that central position either, individuals are left without clear, shared answers to these questions.
Knowledge advances, control increases, but meaning is really no longer in the picture.
Weber emphasizes that science, precisely because it strives to be value neutral, cannot answer questions about what we ought to do or what is worth pursuing. It can clarify consequences of actions and internal consistency of thought experiments, but it cannot choose for us.
As an effect thereof, the burden of ethical decision-making now falls onto the individual.
Without metaphysical guardrails or overarching frameworks that tell us what ultimately matters.
This leads to what Weber famously calls the polytheism of values.
Modern life is now governed by multiple, competing, and often incompatible value systems, none of which can claim universal authority. Individuals must consciously choose their own values, fully aware that other choices are equally rational yet not reconcilable with the other option. This condition is not accidental, it is the direct outcome of rationalization itself, of the process of disenchantment.
Now, this may still sound pretty abstract, so let's move to the present, because there are still multiple ways in which Weber's analysis is acutely relevant nowadays.
Firstly, the rationalization Weber describes has intensified dramatically through algorithms, both in the political sphere and in our personal lives. Datification now drives many large-scale societal processes. We basically live on platforms that capture and steer our attention through algorithmic systems, and we increasingly turn to large language models for immediate answers to our questions.
Corporations have learned that in order to predict and influence our behavior, they simply need enough data about us.
At the same time, while we have access to unprecedented amounts of information, our judgment and ethics and interpretive understanding, what Weber calls verstehen, are quietly undermined.
Not because they disappear, but because we increasingly outsource the work of thinking, of reasoning, of deciding.
Second, social media systems create segmented bubbles in which priorities, value systems, and even political orientations are pre-structured for us. Opinions, moral intuitions, and ways of seeing the world no longer require sustained reflection.
They are increasingly delivered to us without friction through algorithmic selection.
In more extreme cases, people who feel trapped with these closed informational worlds, these bubbles, attempt to regain a sense of control through conspiracy thinking.
Forms of re-enchantment that promise hidden meaning behind an otherwise overly systematic world.
What we see there is not a return to pre-modern belief, but a response to disenchantment.
Now, in addition to this notion of disenchantment, we also have another issue. We don't just have to create our own source of meaning, we are also faced and indoctrinated with prefabricated ones.
These are not designed to help us live meaningful lives, but to maximize attention, profit, and behavioral predictability. This has serious consequences. It undermines democratic processes, because democracy presupposes citizens capable of critical judgment. And it leads to an accumulation of power for those who control our data, and therefore our thinking.
After all, those who design and control the algorithms are not just organizing data, they are actively shaping the conditions in which our opinions and value systems are being formed.